good morning. I hope everyone is doing well on this Monday, August 10th. If you are watching on YouTube, I apologize. Today is a bad allergy day, and it's hard for me to get my contacts in, so I'm hoping this clears up before I go to work. So you see me kind of like what I look like when I wake up and have glasses, which will give you a bad, somewhat bad glare on YouTube today, and I apologize for that. Hope everybody had a good weekend. And welcome into the Side Sermon Podcast. I'm your host, Jared Mueller. You can get a hold of me on Twitter at Jared K. Mueller. And I hope you have found the first episode good, challenging, those kind of things when we talked about priorities. So today we're just going to jump right in. Again, the goal is that I start to do a better job of keeping the time of these in between 15 and 20 minutes. So that'll be the goal. So let's see how I do. Some of you on Twitter, if that's where you follow me and get connected to my podcast, I noted last night that it was a rough week last week. Found out on Tuesday morning that a friend of mine, Josh, passed away. And I won't tell you all the details, but he was hiking with his two teenage sons when he passed away. And so this Saturday, there was a celebration of life where they just everybody just talked about him and talked about what he meant to them and what his life was like. And Josh was described with a lot of glowing remarks that were all accurate. Knowing Josh is, he was a person that cared about people. He was blunt. He cared about the in-depth conversations that he could have with you, even if it was just 5 minutes. He was a gatherer of people. He wanted to bring people together. He was passionate about Jesus. And so to hear his daughter talk about him and all of his family members and, all of those kind of things was just powerful for a 43-year-old, right? There are parts of Saturday where I was thinking, man, if I live to be double his age, 86, I'm not sure I'm going to have the impact that Josh has. And that actually kind of segues right into what I had planned for today's conversation to be about. So I figured it'd be a perfect time to just kind of process that. And so today's conversation is about comparisons. And at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about the theory of relativity, and what that is and what that is not good for. But in general, I'm going to make the statement today that comparisons don't tend to be a positive thing. Especially when it comes to kind of day-to-day living and a whole bunch of other things. So, but I will start with this, that comparisons or comparing yourself to where somebody else is can be useful as a way to set goals. What I mean by that is it can be good for me to look at what Josh did with his life and say, you know what, I'd love to be able to make an impact like that. Right, that's a general goal. Or to see all the people that cared about him and how important community was to him and how much he talked about Jesus and all of those things and go, all right, that's something I should look to do more of in my life. Like that is those kind of goal setting can be beneficial, right? And so I don't have to just talk about Josh, right? When I see a millionaire, all right, I can say, you know what, I'd love to be able to be in a place where money wasn't a driving factor in my life. So how could I get there? Or I'd love to be in a place where I could financially help people without it causing strain or stress in my life. Or when I see somebody who's in really good shape or someone who has run a marathon or someone who plays basketball at a certain level, obviously we're not going to be unrealistic and talk about like, well, if I try hard enough, I should set goals to be like LeBron James. Like, obviously we're not talking about that, but again, you can use comparisons, I think, in a beneficial way as setting some general realistic goals, right? You can look this up, but if you look up what a SMART goal is, it's not SMART as in SMRT, it's, SMART. That SMRT is from a Simpson episode, that Melissa and I quote to each other all the time when we do something stupid or silly. But when you look up SMART goals, it talks about, things that are measurable and that are reasonable and attainable and time-oriented and those kind of things. Again, when you're looking at comparisons, I would encourage you, the only reason or the only way that I think comparisons can be helpful is setting some type of realistic goals. So kind of big picture kind of things, right? But the reality is that comparisons are generally speaking going to be negative for you, for me, and for most people. And the reason for that is that they're not good from a day-to-day perspective because there are so many other variables that go into what is going on in somebody else's life, right? And so if I'm comparing myself to Josh, and again, this is not to besmirch someone who just passed away or anything like that, but here's the reality. If I compare myself to what I heard on Saturday, it was generally the best of Josh, right? And so on a day-to-day basis, if I compare where I am to where everybody talked about Josh on Saturday, it's not really going to set me up for success because I'm going to be comparing myself to the best of him. On the other hand, on a day-to-day basis, if I'm comparing myself to those I see around me, I don't know where they are in their process, right? So if I'm in day one of trying to get into better shape and they're in the 10th year of working out every day, those are unrealistic things for me to start to compare myself to. So when I go to the gym, which isn't happening right now because of the coronavirus, that's probably the only reason, right? I love the gym. If you don't see me on YouTube, that's a sarcasm face. I like to spend my time otherwise, but gym is good for me and for you. But, I don't know where they are in their process. They could be, 5 years in, 2 months in, whatever. And so if they're doing really, really well, and they are 10 years in and I'm in my first year of something, well, that comparison isn't good from a day-to-day basis. Again, long-term, I can say, I hope at year 10, I'm where they are, or I'm somewhere close to that, or maybe even that I'm better than them. But the opposite is also true. If I'm comparing myself to someone who's not doing well, I might be at year 2 or 3, and they might be at day 1 or month 1 or year 1. And so when we start to use comparisons on either side of this, right? So if I'm comparing myself to someone who's much better than me at something or way ahead of me, or I'm comparing myself to someone who's not doing as well as me, either way, it doesn't tend to lead towards anything successful. Because here's the thing. If they're way ahead of me, unrealistically, I want to be where they are. But I'm not through the process the way that they have been through the process. So while it may motivate me for a day or 2 or 3, it's not going to motivate me long term, and I'll tend to give up. And not just me. Again, there are very few of us who are so internally motivated that that's not true. And on the other hand, if I'm comparing myself to someone who's struggling, who's a little bit behind where I am, then why would I be motivated to do better? Right? If that's my comparison point, I tend to, I'm doing okay. Yeah, I can sit around. I can not work today. I can not do this. I can not do that. Yeah, my lawn's a little long, but my neighbor's is really long, right? Like that's the kind of mindset that'll end up happening if I'm comparing myself to someone that who's less than where I am. Not that they're lesser than me or any of those kind of things, but if that's the comparison, if I'm looking backward at someone who is behind where I am, well, there's no motivation there either. It's, I am doing okay. Maybe I'm not as bad as I seem, right? And again, that's okay from a goals perspective, right? If I look at someone who is struggling and go, you know what? Yes, I'm not where I want to be, but, I need to set realistic goals and continue to be okay with slow and steady progress. Again, from a goals perspective, that can be really, really healthy and helpful because it gives me some understanding of where I am, right? But from a day-to-day perspective, it's not good because I don't know where they are in the process. And if I can be really honest, I also don't know I don't understand the nature of them, right? So Josh is a great example. Josh was literally talented at music as well as things like construction and working with his hands. Let's just be very honest. Jared has neither of those, right? Like I'm learning, I'm getting better at things with my hands. I'll never really be good with things that are musical. And so his nature, how he was born with some skills. Now, we'll talk about nurture here in a second, but the reality is he was born with skills that I don't have. Now, on the other hand, hopefully I was born with skills that he didn't have, and we're all born with different skills. And so if I don't realize and understand that nature plays a role, right? There are certain types of people, there are skills, there are personality types, there are all kinds of things that play a huge role in where people are compared to other people. And so I need to make sure that if I'm comparing, I would have to understand the nature, what the intrinsic skills and abilities and talents and all of that someone has to really understand for that comparison to be true. If you think about it from a scientific method perspective, all of these things are the variables that help us understand what is true, right? In the end, we know that nurture plays a huge role as well. As Josh's family was described, his family seemed like a pretty large one that was together all the time. They were also a Christian family who those values and those beliefs were shared on a regular basis and communicated to them all the time. And so Josh was given the nurture to his nature, right? And it seems like the family has some musical abilities and has some work with your hands abilities, and like that's a part of kind of who they were. When for me, many of the developmental years, which would have been spent, helping dad with working on a car or those kind of things, I was in a hospital bed in my parents' living room because of leg surgeries. And so there were a lot of those things that I didn't get an opportunity to do. I also grew up with an older brother and a dad who loved baseball. And so when we had the opportunity and when I was able to, I was playing sports. And so the things that I was nurtured in are not the same things that you and others are nurtured in. So it's important as we look at why comparisons can be really negative is we don't know all the variables that go into where somebody is. The other thing that we just have to be really honest about is oftentimes we see someone's social media self. And what I mean by that is we see what they want us to see, right? So whether they're amazing or struggling or wherever in between, we see the parts of them that they want us to see. We don't see the whole truth. And so sometimes for that person that seems to be doing amazing, they may be hiding all of the struggles that are going on in their life. But you and I know all of our own struggles, right? So we can look at somebody's life and go, wow, they have it all together. They figured this all out. But the reality is their social media self, the self that they're willing to share, isn't exactly true, right? And the opposite is true. We know a lot of people that will share all of their struggles, or they tend to look like they're full of drama, or everything is negative, the world is falling. And the reality is it's probably not always accurate either, right? So if I'm comparing myself to someone whose social media self is full of drama and full of the world is falling, well, I'm going to feel like I'm doing better. I'm doing okay. But that may not be accurate either, right? So again, all the variables that are in play, comparisons don't tend to do us well, right? And so what ends up happening is when we use comparisons for anything besides long-term goals, we set ourselves up for failure. To be blunt, from a Christian perspective, we are not comparing ourselves where we're supposed to, right? As a Christian, we're supposed to compare ourselves to Jesus. He gave us the model. Now, obviously, we also have some biblical characters to compare ourselves to. But the cool thing about most of those is they were failures, right? Their strength and their abilities, really came from the relationship with Jesus. And so, comparisons in general, there aren't a lot of benefits to them, right? The comparison I always want to encourage, though, the simple comparison, is to your former self and the self that you want to become. Again, as long as those are realistic. And so, am I better than I was 2 weeks ago? Am I doing better than I was a year ago? Where can I improve compared to the me I was? Even the me I was yesterday, right? So if I'm always competing against myself to be a better husband, family member, neighbor, community member, counselor, friend, whatever terms, coworker, then there is where a comparison can really benefit us because we know all the variables, right? We know everything about us, and we're comparing one to one. We're comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges. How are we compared to where we were? Excuse me. And where can we go from here, right? And that is where we can use comparisons to really benefit us. Where am I compared to where I want to be and where I've been, right? Do I see a trajectory where I used to be here, now I'm here, and this is where I want to be? Again, are those realistic? And again, I can use other people as pieces of comparison to that realistic future goal of where I want to get. But many times, without knowing all the variables, without knowing the nature, the nurture, where they are in their process, and honestly the truth of whether that's true them or if that's social media them, even then it may not be realistic. And so I really encourage you, as you're looking at your life, to really drop the comparisons. Because in the end, what ends up happening is something called the Theory of Relativity. And so the example I always use is if I'm around a bunch of people who are 5 foot tall, as someone who's 5'11", 6 foot tall, I'm relatively tall compared to all these people who are 5 foot nothing, right? And again, nothing against 5 foot nothings. But when I go and when I was covering the NBA or the NFL and those kind of things, in the NBA, if you're 6'2", you're small. Like that's generally considered a kind of small NBA player, a small point guard, 6'1", 6'2". They're a couple inches taller than me already, right? And then we talk about 6'7", 6'8". I think those people are monsterly tall, like not monsters is a bad thing. And then 7-footers, are you kidding me? They seem like aliens to me, right? And so theory of relativity is something that oftentimes people do without realizing, is that they find themselves hanging out with, being around a certain type of person that they then kind of set themselves up, right? Some people find themselves hanging out with a lot of people who are struggling because it makes them feel better about themselves. Other people who lend towards the more depressed feelings about themselves find themselves hanging out with people who are doing great or doing amazing, and then they can kind of beat themselves up and wish they were more like them or those kind of things. But the reality is the theory of relativity is really a setup for failure because it sets us up compared to other people, and that's just not right. That doesn't increase our ability to succeed. That increases our ability to compare ourselves to other people. And in the end, depending on which side of the fence you tend to lend towards, you will either set yourself up that you are the best among a group so that you can, in theory of relativity, feel good about yourself, if that's the way you tend to lend yourself, or you'll find yourself feeling like you're the worst among a group if that's the way you tend to lend yourself in life, where you feel bad about yourself and, those kind of things. But either way, that's a setup for failure because you are putting yourself in a position where you compare yourself to a whole group of people and either come out the winner or the loser. And the reality is that's probably not accurate. If we look at the world in general, and if you diversify your community, you're going to find that in a lot of ways, you're probably somewhere in the middle. Right? So when it comes to looks and money and this, that, or the other, you're probably somewhere in the middle. Now, there may be one thing that you are significantly better than other people, and there may be other things that you're significantly worse than. And that's why I will encourage you, again, as I did in past posts, diversify your community. If you find that you're the best in almost everything in the people that you're in community with, diversify that. Find some people who are doing amazing as well. So that way you have people a little bit better, a little bit worse. Again, you have people in all parts of their process. And again, this isn't about judgment. It's just about understanding, right? And it's why even in diversifying community, whether it's both racial, gender, as well as age, if I'm hanging around some 20-year-olds, I'm going to have a lot of wisdom. They're going to have a lot of energy. If I'm hanging around a bunch of 70-year-olds, I'm going to have a lot of energy. They're going to have a lot of wisdom, right? There's a lot of ways for that diversification to happen. But in the end, the goal should be to compare yourself to your past and compare yourself to the realistic goals that you have set for yourself in the future. Beyond that, comparisons have very, very few benefits to the world. Agree? Disagree? Let me know. But more importantly, talk to your community. Talk to the people you're in relationships with. Ask them what they think about using comparisons. Ask them if they've heard of the theory of relativity. And until we talk again next week, thank you for stopping by. My name is Jared Mueller, and this has been the Side Sermon Podcast.